was this was the one, not that version, Sons and Daughters, but it was the Casting Crowns version. We'll sing that as you get to learn it. We'll sing their version maybe the next time or two. Really good version, but it's your. Do you know where your breath came from? It's your breath in our lungs. It is His breath. Genesis chapter 2, verse 7 says, "Then the Lord God formed man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And man became a living being." Your breath. It didn't come from evolution. It didn't come from an accident. It didn't come from a caveman or such, or some kind of tadpole being. Your breath came from God. You say, "Oh, that's bull." Well, it's not bull to me. I believe it. It's your breath in my lungs, and I pour out this praise to you. It's already His. It's already His breath. Will you praise Him with His breath? Take your Bible and turn to the book of Daniel, chapter 6. The book of Daniel. Daniel is considered a minor prophet by some. The Jews consider it to be a book of writing, but Daniel probably really should be considered a major prophet along with Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah. He should be in that category. A lot of scholars believe that Daniel is the key to prophecy in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And that's probably true. That's very true. It's not probably, it's very true. Daniel is very important to prophecy in the Old Testament and the New Testament. But if Daniel is the key to prophecy, prayer is the key to Daniel's life. Daniel is very devout in his prayer. If we were to gauge our life against Daniel's life in a prayer, if we were to chart out a bar graph or a line graph and chart out the frequency of Daniel's prayers, he would probably be maybe off the chart. Well, David may beat him. I think David prays 7 times a day. Daniel is going to be quoted as praying 3 times a day. I'm going to be thankful if we can probably squeeze out 3 times in a week, maybe. We may not even blip on the bar graph or the line graph compared to Daniel or David. But prayer is the key to Daniel's life. Just think about the book of Daniel as you're getting there. We have a handful of guys that practice civil disobedience. Now, I'm not telling you to practice civil disobedience, not yet at least, but it may get to that point. But you have a handful of guys here that do that. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, all 4 of these young men are known for civil disobedience. Chapter 1, you have Daniel saying, or being quoted, or being said that Daniel had purposed in his heart that he was not going to eat the food or drink the drink of the kings there. He was going to have his own diet. Remember, he was going to have his own, and he was going to be compared to the others, and they were going to find out that he had done better. Chapter 3, you come to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they decide, we're not going to bow to the king. So they are in a form of civil disobedience. Chapter 6 for us today, we see Daniel again in civil disobedience, and he is not going to bow to the new king, to the king that is there. Now, I don't know if that means anything, but the way that our government is, it seems like it may not be that far in the future where Christians have to practice some form of civil disobedience, even in these borders right here. But normally, when you think of Daniel, when you look at this chapter, when you look at chapter 6 here, you think about the lion's den. That's what you think about. You've heard that story. You've seen paintings of it. You've seen pictures of it. Bible school, Sunday school. You are well familiar with the story of Daniel in the lion's den. But how did Daniel make it? How did he make it through that? What led him to have to go to the lion's den? How did he persevere? How did he overcome this experience that he was in? In chapter 1, Daniel is probably about 14 years of age. He had been taken from his family in Judah. Some of his siblings, maybe his parents or something went with him, but they have been taken. They've been taken out of Judah. Maybe his brothers and sisters, some of them probably went with him. Maybe the parents did as well, but they are held captive. They're taken. Babylonian captivity there. They have been snatched out of their nation. They've been snatched out of their city. They've been snatched out of their home, out of their house, and they have been dropped. Daniel has been dropped in a culture that is the complete opposite of what he has grown up in. Morally, it's the complete opposite. Spiritually, the Babylonian Empire is the complete opposite of what Daniel grew up in. Just read Revelation. It talks about Babylon. It talks about this culture. That you could study that and see what is a polar opposite of what Daniel had grown up in. So that's his situation. Now the first 4 chapters of Daniel will cover 43 years. You'll see the reign of Nebuchadnezzar at the beginning of Daniel. And the first 4 chapters are 43 years. Then you come to chapter 5, after chapter 4, and it's the last hours, the last days, really it is the last hours of Belshazzar's reign. So you have Nebuchadnezzar, then you have chapter 5, which is the last hours of Belshazzar's reign, and then you come to what we're looking at today, and it's chapter 6, and there's a new empire. All of that takes place in 5 or 6 chapters there. You run through three kings, 3 rulers, 3 empires. So chapter 6 is the start of a new empire. The Jews were taken into captivity by the Babylonians. That's chapter 1 through 5. And the new empire that takes over is the Medo-Persian Empire. I'm sure you've heard of all of those names. Maybe you think back into world history class at school or something. But you have the Babylonians, the Babylon Empire, and then they're overtaken by the Medo-Persian Empire. So there is a new king on the throne in chapter 6, and his name is Darius, and he's going to set up his government. That's what happens. A new person comes into office. It doesn't matter if it's local office, probably even the mayor's office, but a new person is elected. Even if they're elected, the dog catcher, the deputy dog catcher is probably going to be appointed by the dog catcher, right? So that's what happens. It doesn't matter if you're the president. The president does what? He sets up his cabinet, and that's what Darius is doing. Darius is setting up his cabinet. That's just what happens in government. So he is going to set up, what he's going to do is he's going to break down the nation, the empire, into 120 different areas. And he's going to set up 120 different governors. So he's going to put these governors over these, let's just say, states or something. You got these 120 states in the empire. So he's going to designate you 120 governors. You're going to rule over these states. And then I'm going to put these 3 vice presidents over the 120. So how would that break down? Well, that would break down into 40, isn't it? So you've got these 3 vice presidents. They're going to be over 40 governors each, who are over the 40 areas in the nation, the 40 states there. So that's what's happening. So that brings us to chapter 6, verse 1 and 2. So it seems good to Darius. He's the new Medo-Persian king, the emperor. He's the new ruler, to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom. Those are the governors. They're the ones that are appointed. That they would be in charge of the whole kingdom. They each have their own little state, their own little area. And over them, the 3 commissioners. They're the vice presidents. So these 3 vice presidents, of whom Daniel was one. That these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss. So the governors are accountable to the vice presidents, and the vice presidents are supposed to make sure that the government runs good, that there is no loss for King Darius, that everything goes well. Verse 3. Then this Daniel. Now it's interesting that it says then this Daniel. That's just interesting the way it's written in the Hebrew. There's emphasis on this, that Daniel is he's heads above the others. He's more equipped. Then this person. It's like emphatic. Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps, because he possessed an extraordinary spirit. And the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. So Daniel is distinguished. He has this extraordinary spirit. He is better. He's more equipped than the other vice presidents, than the other three who are in charge. That distinguished means he excelled. Daniel has excelled. He's prospered. Out of the three vice presidents, Darius could tell, hey, this dude is better. He is better. He's more equipped. He's able to distinguish. He's able to discern. He's able to tell what is best for the kingdom. He's making the people under him are flourishing, and they're doing just better. They're doing better than the other groups. So he can tell this. Darius can see this. Daniel is sharper. And it must have been, Darius probably even said it. He probably even said it, and if he didn't say it, then it was shown. It was shown so people could see that Daniel was more in favor with Darius. So look at verse 4. Then the commissioners and satraps began trying to find a ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to government affairs. So see, Darius has made some kind of mention or some kind of example that, hey, Daniel is the golden child. Every business seems to have a golden child, right? A child that can do no wrong. It doesn't matter, is it business, school, the teacher's pet, right? The one that brings the apple, the one that the teacher favors over everybody else. You remember that in school. It's the same way in business. I mean, I've been in few different places, and there's always a golden child that can do no wrong. Maybe you sit out there with that blank look on your face because you are the golden child. Possibly that's what it was. But Daniel is this golden child of Darius, and everybody else in the corporation, what do? That golden child's got to come down. He's got to fall. He's got to fall. He or she has to come down a rung on the ladder because they're making us look bad. Because we're not living up, we're not excelling like they are. So Darius has made some kind of reference that Daniel is doing pretty good. So the commissioners and satraps began looking for a ground of accusation against Daniel. Daniel comes in late. He sleeps on the clock. He uses the credit card, the company credit card, for personal things. He's taking trips on the company dime. We got to find something in government affairs here to accuse Daniel of, but they couldn't. They could find no ground of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as he was faithful and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. So they're looking. Darius has shown that Daniel, he said something. Daniel is doing good. We've got to take him down. The other said, we got to take this guy down. But Daniel has great integrity. So what did they do? They hacked into Daniel's computer. They checked his emails. They couldn't find anything. They checked his text messages. They couldn't find anything in the text message that said he was up to no good with Darius, or he was planning some kind of scheme. Daniel didn't have to bleach his emails. He didn't have to destroy his emails. He didn't have to burn them. He didn't have to crush them or anything. Mueller came in and investigated Daniel, and he couldn't find anything wrong with Daniel either. Special counsels, you like that, don't you? I had to think hard about that, Bill. But special counsels came in. They couldn't accuse Daniel of anything either. So he's above. He's above. Now let me finish this, okay? Wouldn't it be great if there was somebody in our government today that was like a Daniel and above reproach as well? I don't know if there's ever been one. But Daniel was above reproach. He was honest. There was no fault. There was no lies in Daniel. So they got to do something else. What are we going to do now? You know, it's interesting how Scripture kind of parallels life at times. So everybody is going to turn on Daniel. These commissioners, these satraps, they are going to turn on Daniel. The boss is spending too much time with Daniel. He calls Daniel in. You know, it's like the meeting. Everybody comes to the meeting. The satraps come, and then he dismisses those 120. Darius says, okay, you guys can leave. But hey, you 3 vice presidents, you stay back. I got a little more to talk to about you. And then those 3 vice presidents, they stay. They think they're doing good. And then he dismisses the 3 vice presidents, and he says, oh, but Daniel, you stay and wait a little longer. I've got a little more to discuss with you. So what do? They walk out of the room. They walk out of the room, and what do? They start whispering to one another. Hey, psst, 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 psst. We got to come up with something. Why aren't we in there with Darius? Why is Daniel still in there with Darius? We've got to get in the closed-door meeting. Everybody wants to be in the closed-door meeting unless it's about them, right? So Daniel's in there. What can we do? Then the commissioners, they begin trying to find a ground of accusation. There's no accusation. There's no corruption. There's no evidence of this. He's faithful, no negligence. Nothing could be found in Daniel. Verse 5, then these men said, we will not find any ground of accusation against this Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God. So they said, hey, we've got to look into his religion. We got to look into his God. We got to look into something he's doing personally in his private time, up there in his upper room, up there on the rooftop. We've got to come up with something like that. We know that he is faithful to God, so we've got to set him apart or alienate him because of that. So we're going to outlaw. We're going to outlaw something religious that Daniel does. Verse 6 and 7. Then these commissioners and satraps came by agreement. So they've agreed on it. They've conspired. They've connived. They've come up with a trick. They've come by agreement to the king and spoke to him as follows. King Darius live forever. Now there is not a man who has lived forever at this time. There's not a man who has ever lived forever. Ever. So they come to him and they entice his ego. King Darius, we want you to live forever. King Darius, we want to set you up on this pedestal. King Darius, we want to make something of you. Oh, that you would, because you're so good, King Darius. Verse 7, all the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps and the high officials and the governors and have counseled together that the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction that anyone who makes a petition to any god or man beside you, O king, for 30 days shall be cast into the lion's den. O King Darius, we want you to live forever. You're such a great king. Man, the leadership that you have brought to the Medo-Persian Empire, to this place here, to this filthy, rotten place that we're in right here. It was pitiful before. This nation was pitiful. But oh, Darius, you have come in and you've made the government so good. It's firing on all cylinders. Everything is just prospering, King Darius. And we want to thank you. And we want to thank you by setting up this prayer to you. We want to pray to you for the next 30 days. So Darius probably responds, oh, shucks, guys. It's no big deal. It wasn't anything. I'm just Harvard educated. I'm just a wise person. I just know how to deal with this stuff. I know how to take people. I know how to manipulate them. I know how to get what I want out of them. And the nation's going to be fine. Oh, don't worry about it, guys. So Darius, maybe he just blows it off. But these guys are persistent. Verse 8. O Darius, that you would live forever, that we may pray to you for 30 days. Now, O king, establish. So they come back and they're got an exclamation point with them now. King, you got to do this. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it may not be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked. So the law of the Medes and Persians means that's final. There's no taking it back. What happens, happens. So I said, King, we want you to do this. Now, could you imagine praying to anybody in the government for 30 days? Past or present or future? No. You say that's crazy. So these guys have conspired. They've gotten together. We can get Daniel to fail this way. They knew who Daniel was praying to. Now, I told you, Daniel's the key to prophecy. One of the keys to prophecy in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, the key to Daniel's life is prayer. Prayer was important to Daniel. So they knew prayer was so important to Daniel that these other people, these 120, this council, the other two governors, they knew. They knew how faithful Daniel was in prayer. So we can catch him on this because we're going to set King Darius up to be prayed to, verse 10. Now, when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house. Now in his roof chamber, he had windows open toward Jerusalem, and he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God as he had been doing previously. So nothing changed. Daniel knew that this piece of legislation had been signed. He knew it was signed, but he's going to keep praying to God. That's civil disobedience. If somebody told, you just think about that. Would you practice the same civil disobedience that Daniel is? Verse 11. Then these men came by agreement. So they've all come together. They are all showing up at Daniel's door, knocking on his door. Daniel can hear the footsteps in the hall. He can hear them walking up the staircase. He hears them in the outside. He hears their camels pull up in the alleyway. He hears them get off of the camels. He hears them tie the rope around a post. He hears them go up the stairs. He hears them walking in the hall. He hears them about to knock on the door. He hears them whispering outside of his chamber. Daniel knows what's about to happen. How come? Because Daniel knew that the document had been signed. And what's the punishment for praying the way Daniel prayed? Lion's den. It's already been determined. It's already been set forth. So they know. They've come by agreement and found Daniel making petition and supplication before his God. They knew how they were going to find Daniel. They knew what position he would be in. Now, if you look through the book of Daniel, you're going to find Daniel in communication with God. That's a picture of always of what Daniel, you see him doing. The key to Daniel's life is prayer. He is praying to God, and Daniel is blessing God. He's giving God thanks. And God is constantly sending, is constantly speaking back to Daniel. Daniel is in an attitude of prayer. He has this gratitude about it. He has this thankfulness about him. That's what it said in verse 10. He's giving thanks back to God. He's blessing God for all that God has done, and God is constantly speaking back to Daniel. Now, how old was Daniel when he was taken in to captivity under the Babylons? He was 14. He's 14 at the start of this book. Daniel is ripped away from his family. He's ripped away from his hometown. He's driven 800 to 1,000 miles away from his house, and he's dropped in this foreign country. They don't speak the same language. They don't do the same things. They're involved in much different things that Daniel was involved in. Daniel is told to eat this, you drink this, you do that. But he never gives up on God. Daniel continues to pray to God. God, I've been through this. What is happening now? By chapter 6, when you come to chapter 6, you know how old Daniel is? He's in his 80s. Daniel is in his 80s by this time, and people didn't live that long back then. So they've got to be wondering, who is this guy with this white hair? Look at all the wisdom he has. But the key to Daniel's life is prayer. That has sustained him this whole 80 plus years of his life. When he has been snatched out of his homeland, when he has been told to eat this diet, what does Daniel do? Daniel prays. Daniel's been in prayer the whole time. He's been in prayer in the good days. He's been in prayer in the civil disobedient days. He was already in prayer. Daniel didn't wait for a crisis before he went to God in prayer. Verse 10 says he's given thanks to God. He's blessing God. Every day, 3 times a day. Now think of this. If the government came in and said, hey, you can't pray to God for 30 days. If the government said that, if the government made a declaration, you cannot pray to God for 30 days, would any of us be in trouble during that 30 days? You know what I'm saying? So the key to Daniel's life is prayer. That's how he's made it through this. That's how he's made it through captivity. How he's made it through each leader, each empire. Now he's in Darius's Medo-Persian Empire. How is he going to make it through this? It's prayer. And what do we see? What's the key to Daniel's life? Daniel is a key to prophecy. Prayer is a key of Daniel's life. And the key of Daniel's prayer is gratitude. Back in verse 10, he knows it's been signed. He's on his knees 3 times a day. He's praying, giving thanks before God as he had been doing previously. Verse 11, these men know what's going on. They come in mass. They have a plan. How do they find Daniel? They find Daniel, verse 11 says, making petition and supplication. That petition means Daniel's making a request. Petition is a request. God, please help the government. And we all know the government needs help. God, please help the government. Please help my children. Please help the business. Please help my family. Please do. That's a petition right there. Supplication is asking for mercy. Daniel is making a petition. God, please do this. God, and then he's making supplication. God, have mercy. Daniel knew what had been signed, and his prayer is a prayer of supplication probably. He's probably saying, God, have mercy on me for what happens is about to happen. That's probably why he's up there praying. God, have mercy on me for what happens next, because he knew those guys were coming. So see, we're still in verse 10. It says Daniel is giving, this is the first thing we see about his prayer, what he's praying. He's giving thanks. That means there's action. Daniel is giving thanks. There's an action to what he's doing. Something is being done. It's not an emotion. It's not that Daniel has a warm fuzzy going down his back spine or this warm tingling feeling going up his leg. There's an action to what Daniel is doing. Remember, these guys are popping in on this. Daniel has an action. He's on his knees doing something, and what he's doing is giving thanks, and that thanks has energy with it. There's an energy to Daniel's prayer. We talked about that energy last week. We talked about the having this attitude of gratitude, and that's what Daniel is doing. Daniel has this energy with this prayer that is going on, and these guys are going to walk in on the middle of Daniel's energetic prayer. How much life does our prayers have? How much energy is in our prayers? How vibrant are they? How full are they? How explosive are our prayers? You don't turn to me. Let me read Colossians. Colossians chapter 1, verse 11 and 12 to you. It says, Paul's writing to the Colossians here. He says, joyously giving thanks to the Father who has qualified us to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. Now, if you had somebody pass away and you were going to have an inheritance of some, what would it be, 7-figure number, how much joy would you have in your life? Would you be able to call your spouse and say, hey, guess what, honey? You don't have to work anymore. We just got a 7-figure inheritance. Would there be some excitement in your life? You better show up for church next Sunday and give a tithe off that too. There would be some excitement. You would have this joyously giving thanks because you have qualified for this inheritance. You have an inheritance that's beyond any 7 figures, 8 figures, 10 figures, trillions of dollars, whatever. You have an inheritance that's beyond our national debt, which we can't even fathom in our own minds. You have an inheritance of everything. The Father has given the Son everything, and you are heirs to that. You are adopted into that family. So there should be some energy. That should be cause for energy, joyously giving thanks. And that's the way they found Daniel. Daniel was joyously giving thanks. It's not, he wasn't showing just a little emotion. It had energy, and there was action to what Daniel was doing. When a heart is gripped by grace, it does something. It moves. Now look at the order of Daniel's prayer, still in verse 10 and 11. So the first thing he does is he gives thanks. And then they found Daniel making petition. Step 1 was thanks. God, thank you. I'm going to give blessing to you. There's going to be this energy about the thankfulness that I have for you. And then I'm going to make this petition to you. And I'm going to have this supplication. So that was the pattern that Daniel followed. Now, what are some things that wear you out? Turning on the news wears us out. Turning on the news wears me out. It stresses me, gives me anxiety. You can turn on the news for, 15, 20, 30 minutes. You turn on if you're good enough to watch the news for 30 minutes, I want to ask you, how do you feel when you get up from that? You feel exhausted. Just forget it. Turn it off. Watch Andy Griffith or something. I mean, how much better would your time be spent watching Andy Griffith as opposed to the news? Yeah. But things in society wear us out. Accusations wear us out. People saying stuff, people doing crazy things, going around. That just wears us out. But Daniel knows what's going on. This Daniel kept on going. Society was completely different than what he had grown up in, but he's been here now for 70 plus years, but Daniel is still giving thanks to God. So he's been praying this way 3 times a day since he's been there, since before then, since he could remember. 70, 80 years, Daniel has done this, and maybe he's thinking there, but this isn't what he's thinking. He's not thinking, God, what have you done? God, why have you left me to this? Because I know what stands in front of me, and it's the lion's den. We're almost done. So he constantly prays, verse 10, constantly prays 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks. He's constantly, this is what I want to leave you with right here. Daniel is constantly doing something. If you constantly watch social media, if you constantly watch the news, whatever it is that brings you down, if you're constantly engaged in doing that thing that brings you down, your mind is going to take on this form. This is a medical study that has been done. Daniel is constantly 3 times a day doing something, giving thanks to God. Imagine if you were giving thanks to God, prayer and supplication, petition and supplication 3 times a day. Imagine the spirit that your mind, the shape, the condition that your mind would be in. And Daniel has been doing this for 80 years. For 80 years. Here's what they say. Here's what the medical study said. Your brain takes on a shape of what it rests on. what it ponders on, what it dwells on. The neurons, the electrons, whatever it is up there begins to take this shape of what your focus is. You focus on worry, your brain's going to take that shape. You focus on sadness, irritability, you focus on depression, you focus on anger, your brain is going to take that shape. It's going to become your natural disposition because you have dwelt on that. You have pondered. Your brain has rested upon that. What has Daniel's brain rested upon? If you focus, the opposite is true. If you focus, if your brain rests on, ponders on thankfulness to God, if your brain ponders on that, stays on that, if ponders, petitions, supplications to God, it will find things to be thankful for. We all know somebody who can find something to be angry about, even when there is nothing. That's because that's what they ponder on, it's what they think on. Imagine if your mind, if you reprogrammed your mind to be thankful, to be grateful to God. God, would you begin to rewrite that program in my mind? God, may I be grateful. May I be appreciative. God, may I bless you in my life. God, may I find the joy in my life that you have for me. See, Daniel wasn't focused on the lions. Where was the focus of Daniel? The focus of Daniel was the thanksgiving to God. God, I'm going to give you this thanks. I've been doing it for 80 years, and my brain rests on that. And Daniel had this peace about him. Ask God to reprogram your mind that it may dwell on thankfulness to Him, that you may have an attitude of gratitude as well.